Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today and to present the work of my group from Wrocław, from Poland. So the results I will be showing and discussing today is a result of the work of the following people. And yes, and let's start. So my talk will be about tortuosity, but it will be not shown in a classical way, but I will be discussing inertial effects on tortuosity in the flow through porous medium. So as you know, tortuosity is a factor, is a number, dimensionless number that tells you how wiggled the flow is, how tortuous are the paths of particles flowing through the porous medium. And in my group, we started research on tortuosity like in 2008. There was a paper on classical tortuosity in pore scale fluid flow through random porous medium. And so what you see here is the effect of porosity on tortuosity of the flow. On the left-hand side, you have a lower porous medium. On the right-hand side is a higher porous medium. And this basically shows you how this talk will be structured, because today I will be telling you about the inertial effects in highly porous medium, as well as in the low porous medium. So the motivation for that comes from the paper that I read when I was a PhD student. It was a paper from the group from Fortaleza, from Professor Jose Andrade, who has published a work on the inertial effects in the fluid flows through porous medium. It was a work based on the fluent results of the fluid flow through pore scale porous medium, in which Professor Andrade has introduced participation number factor to quantify the dispersion of kinetic energy in the pore scale flow through porous medium at increasing Reynolds number. So we followed this work and did a similar study in a three-dimensional medium built of randomly distributed obstacles. So this is a very standard picture you see at this conference, but it is already showing some results. So let me discuss roughly. So this is a result of a fluid flow done with an open foam finite volume code, in which we have a pore scale flow at two different Reynolds numbers. This is the same sample. As you already can notice from the figure and from the velocity distribution that is colored, the red colors the higher velocity and the blue colors the lower velocity, that in the low Reynolds number, the flow is much more localized in several channels. Whereas if you increase Reynolds number, you see the highly dispersed kinetic energy that is visible as dispersion of those preferential channels. So this was of our interest to quantify that. And so we started with a standard procedure, checking the Forchheimer and Darcy law, and we noticed where is the region, more or less, where the inertial effects appear. Then we used our definition of tortuosity. That is basically, okay, there are two ways of computing tortuosity. So followed this talk, there will be a talk of my former PhD student, David, who will discuss more about the differences. But for this project, we didn't calculate flow paths. We did integrate the velocity field. But by doing this integrate, we noticed that there is a very slight decrease in tortuosity when you increase Reynolds number. So now you have to turn on your imagination. What happens in the flow when the tortuosity drops down? This drop is very slight. Initially, when I was doing preliminary study for this project in lattice-Boltzmann, we were thinking this is a lattice-Boltzmann problem with inertial flows regimes. But it turned out that by doing finite volumes, we got the same results. This is highly porous medium. Again, this is very high porous medium, and this effect is very little. Then we computed a special integral that tells you what is the area of the flow which goes backwards. So you have a three-dimensional sample, you push the flow in the streamwise direction, but sometimes part of the flow wants to go back. So when this happens in highly porous medium, this happens when the vortices appear. And so this quantity, the very simple integral that we introduced in our recent paper, it gives you a very clear picture when the backward flow appears. So in highly porous medium, that means this is the moment vortices appear in the flow. So then the result of this part is that tortuosity wins, because tortuosity shows you the deviation from the Darcy regime at the very beginning. So the very first onset of the inertia in the highly porous medium is shown by tortuosity. Now I move on to the low porous medium, in which we choose the sample of stopped stones packing. It was cut, then we pushed the flow into dimensions, and we tried to fit Darcy law to this and to see the same Forheimer-Darcy deviation, which is basically not very visible. From this picture, we increase Reynolds number in similar way as we did for highly porous medium, but we cannot notice the deviation from linear flow that easily. And then we computed tortuosity, and boom, we have a very, very large effect of the increasing Reynolds number, which is completely not visible in the standard analysis that people usually do. So for low Reynolds number, remember, if you don't have Forheimer deviation, that does not mean you don't have inertial effects. Then we see that if you increase the tortuosity at some point for the Reynolds number, you also see the decrease of tortuosity. So streamlines wants to straighten, and then there is a very, very large increase of tortuosity, which is which we associated with another physical mechanisms. So there are two competing physical mechanisms that decrease and increase tortuosity. So yeah, in this work, we also try to analyze it. And one of the tool is again rho minus. So this is again the same integral. Now we integrate the backward flow in the low porous medium. And this is amazing because we have non-zero backward flow. I mean, amazing. Okay, this is low porous medium. That means there are some paths that want to go backward because of the structure, which is geometrical. But then we looked more deeply into rho minus by looking on the maps of the velocity fields and rho minus map. So on this figure, in the top, you have a low Reynolds number. In the bottom, you have high Reynolds number. The velocity is velocity, everyone knows. But rho minus, so the colors, that tells you, whereas the flow goes in the direction of streamwise direction or in the opposite direction. And there are two mechanisms. One of them is the geometry-driven negative direction, and the other is appearance of vortices. So again, two mechanisms. Then if you increase Reynolds number, you see more vortices appearing in the pore scale, and also that the preferential paths are changing. And these two physical mechanisms are of our interest to quantify. This is very recent work. We just submitted archive a few days ago about it, and we want to quantify even more deeper what is really happening on the onset from Darcy to non-Darcy flow that again was not visible in the Forheimer fields. Then what we did at the very end to give some nice application for that, we computed apparent permeability. So we used standard Darcy and computed apparent permeability factor, which drops down significantly in the inertial regime. And we found a nice scaling of the tortuosity versus apparent permeability that in the inertial regime, not in the Darcy. In Darcy, this is not very easy, but in the inertial regime, it goes along the power law, and we don't know whether this is universal or not. This is very, very preliminary. We just found it. It works in this particular system of stop stones. Thank you for your attention.